Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, Trump sends a wrecking crew to knock down the east wing of the White House to build a ballroom. We'll speak to one of the former officials trying to stop him, although it may already be too late.
And the Mississippi Miracle. I'm going to be trying to find out why one of the poorest states in America is outperforming many of the richer states when it comes to education. But first...
Donald Trump is already the wealthiest man to ever hold the American presidency by far. He has also continued to increase that wealth while in office to the tune of an extraordinary $3 billion over the last year. His cryptocurrency ventures adding an estimated $2 billion of that. He recouped $500 million in court, and his licensing business, selling the Trump name to buildings and businesses around the world, is booming. It raked in $400 million. He's made tens of millions more by filing often outlandish multi-billion-dollar lawsuits that media companies settle just to keep him sweet. But now he's on to a new moneymaker, one of the most extraordinary of them all.
President Trump is pushing for a personal $230 million payout from the Justice Department as compensation for the federal investigations he's faced.
Well, I guess they probably owe me a lot of money for that. Probably, yeah, that's true.
That money would ultimately come from American taxpayers.
And even President Trump acknowledges that suing his own Justice Department is kind of a conflict of interest.
It's interesting because I'm the one that makes the decision, right? And, that decision would have to go across my desk. And it's awfully strange to make a decision where I'm paying myself. In other words, did you ever have one of those cases where you have to decide how much you're paying yourself in damages? But I was damaged very greatly, and any money that I would get, I would give to charity.
What a guy. And will he give the tax write-off to charity too? And will that charity perchance be the Trump Presidential Library Foundation? We will see. Oh, and in case you were wondering who at the supposedly independent Justice Department has to sign off on this payment, proposed settlements of more than $4 million have to be approved by the Deputy Attorney General or the Associate Attorney General. The Deputy AG, Todd Blanche, was one of Trump's lead defence lawyers, and the Associate AG, Stanley Woodward, represented Trump's valet and co-defendant in the Mar-a-Lago secret documents case. How convenient. Blanche and Woodward might still recuse themselves, but the president's conflict of interest is the real issue here. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson was asked about that.
How comfortable are you with the president apparently seeking $230 million from the Department of Justice?
I don't know the details about that. I've just read it. I didn't talk with him about that. I know that he believes he's owed that reimbursement.
It is Mike Johnson's job as the Republican leader in the House, as the Speaker of that chamber, to provide oversight and rein in a president, any president, when they cross a constitutional or ethical line. Instead, he's basically giving the old Sergeant Schultz defence.
See nothing? I was not here. I did not even get up this morning.
Sadly, Mike Johnson does not come with his own laugh track. That would be a great upgrade if
Give
he
him
did.
time, give him time.
And Congress's complete abdication of their constitutional role over the last decade or two has, I think, been the story behind the story for a while now. The Founding Fathers did not see Mike Johnson coming. But let's leave that to one side. Back to this story. What exactly is this settlement about? There are two claims. Trump lodged the first claim in 2023. It was that the FBI and special counsel violated his rights by investigating him for potential collusion with Russia in the 2016 election. And the second claim was filed in 2024. That was that the FBI violated Trump's right to privacy by searching Mar-a-Lago for classified documents. And they obviously found those documents, John. Of course, all these investigations went through the proper process and were signed off by the appropriate authorities at the time. Trump would possibly be in jail by now if he hadn't won the 2024 election, so I'm not sure how Trump's due compensation there for getting away with an apparent crime. Especially when you try to answer the question, compensation for what damages? You see, Trump did rack up over $100 million in legal fees, but he didn't pay those fees. His political action committees did, or to be more precise, his donors paid his legal bills. So there's nothing to compensate here. Now, we should say the White House does promise that all Department of Justice officials will be following the guidance of career ethics officials when they decide whether to pay Trump off or not. But that's less than comforting when you consider, John, there is no senior ethics advisor at the Department of Justice because they got sacked by Pam Bondi 3 months ago and is yet to be replaced. Extremely unsurprising news there. And one more little wrinkle about this story, the Justice Department doesn't actually require a public announcement of these kinds of settlements. So if they do pay Trump off, they may not even officially inform the public. Although I do suspect if the payoff does happen, everyone is going to find out about this. After all, this story leaked, didn't it? Obviously, someone on the inside does not approve.
Yeah, interesting. After seeing the destruction of countless buildings, not to mention lives, in places like Gaza and Ukraine in recent years, it's perhaps surprising that the partial demolition of just one building in Washington, D.C. could be so jarring. But of course, the White House isn't just any building, and the sight of excavators and earth movers gouging chunks out of the east wing of the White House this week was shocking to many. All the more so when it was done without any official process or approval, in attempted secrecy, with staff told not to even post photos, reporters being kept away, reportedly, by the Secret Service. And after the president himself had been making promises like this.
It won't interfere with the current building. It'll be near it, but not touching it, and pays total respect to the existing building, which I'm the biggest fan of.
Not so much, as it turns out. Not only is this new ballroom going to be touching the White House, the East Wing is now expected to be demolished in its entirety, along with the colonnade leading to it from the main White House building.
Trump says the new ballroom will be 90,000 square feet, larger than the White House residence itself. It will hold 999 people and cost $250 million, which the president insists will come entirely from private donations.
The ballroom is bigger than the White House. Trump says that he'll be personally paying for some of the cost, although he hasn't said how much he'll be chipping in. Being private money means that this hasn't had to come from Congress, so there's no oversight, no need for an approval process. There are no detailed public plans as to what this ballroom is going to look like, just some pictures the president's been waving about for the cameras. And this ballroom just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Clearly, Trump wants something to rival the great palaces of Europe.
We are going to make and build a ballroom, which they've wanted for probably 100 years at the White House, and it'll be a world-class, beautiful ballroom.
Who says this? It only just came up. There are all sorts of issues here, although most of the East Wing of the White House only dates from the Franklin Roosevelt administration in the early 1940s. It is still historically and culturally significant. And just who is going to be paying for this ballroom and what they get in return for that remains to be seen. Some prominent Democrats are already raising the alarm.
Hillary Clinton says it's not his house, it's your house, and he's destroying it. Gavin Newsom says ripping apart the White House just like he's ripping apart the Constitution. And Elizabeth Warren says, oh, you're trying to say the cost of living is skyrocketing. Donald Trump can't hear you over the sound of bulldozers demolishing a wing of the White House to build a brand new ballroom.
Although Republican Senator Josh Hawley is accusing those Democrats opposed to the demolition of hypocrisy.
I hear all of a sudden from my liberal friends that they're very concerned about our history. Really, these are the same people who tore down every statue they could get their hands on in the last 4 years.
Cute argument, although there is kind of a difference between tearing down the East Wing of the White House and taking down a statue to somebody like Robert E. Lee, who fought to secede from the United States so he could keep black people as unpaid slaves. The Trump administration points out that most, if not all, presidents put their own stamp on the White House, and that is true. From the furniture to the wallpaper, curtains, the desk in the Oval Office. Some have put in tennis courts and swimming pools and put bowling alleys in. Jackie Kennedy famously remade the interior of the White House with a French imperial influence, but Trump has taken the imperial flourishes to a whole new level, gaudily gilding the walls and ceilings and fireplaces with gold, ripping up the Rose Garden to put in a patio with umbrellas resembling one of his golf resorts.
The president hosting Republican senators at the White House Tuesday, praising the sound of demolition work.
You probably hear the beautiful sound of construction to the back. You hear that sound? Oh, that's music to my ears.
Now, it's easy to see what Trump is doing to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue as symbolic as well. He's tearing up the East Wing just as he's torn up conventions, and he's rebuilt the government, the legal system, public health, education, indeed America itself, knocking down edifices literal and institutional. But the reality is that those with the will to stop Donald Trump lack the power, and those with the power lack the will. Yes, the next president will have the power to knock this ballroom down if they want to, or they can turn it into an indoor pickleball court if they so choose. But, Chaz, some things just cannot be rebuilt.
That is true, although I have to say, I don't think the East Wing is irreplaceable, and I don't really care if Trump wants to build a ballroom. Trump says that the ballroom will hold about 1,000 people and is needed to alleviate space limitations at state dinners and events. Sure, that's not an unreasonable proposal. In the past, the White House has only been able to cater for events with fewer than 200 attendees. Any more than that, and the White House has had to erect tents to hold everybody. I can see how this here would annoy Trump. So if he wants to build a ballroom, I don't see the big deal. I'm more interested in what you actually touched on before, John. How is he paying for this ballroom? I'm interested in that. The White House released a list of donors this week, including tech companies like Amazon, Apple, Google and Meta, as well as a bunch of crypto investors and tobacco companies and oil companies and other companies subject to government regulations. Some of his appointees have donated to the cause as well, like Howard Lutnick, Kelly Loeffler, one of his ambassadors. He's also throwing in the proceeds of some of his successful lawsuits. Maybe that settlement from before is going to end up in the ballroom fund. What we don't know, though, is exactly who gave what, whether there are any other donors we haven't been told about, and we don't know if there's any connection between these donations and the significant business that some of these donors have done with the government. And that obviously raises serious ethical concerns. I know we're all getting used to these kinds of issues with the Trump administration, John, but in my book, that's the problem with this ballroom.
Yeah, it is a problem for sure. I'm concerned about both, in fact, because there is a reason why the White House hasn't had a 1,000-seat ballroom in its 233-year history, for the same reason that it was not built like a palace or a castle. It was meant to be the people's house, a public building. A 1,000-seat ballroom goes against the very intention of not just the White House, but the presidency itself. Remember, the founders considered whether to name the new head of the American state a king or an emperor. They decided to use what they saw as the humblest term they could agree on, president. Now, we think that that's a powerful term now, but in fact it was the president over a cabinet and someone who presided over the American Constitution. Trump obviously is ignoring the Constitution and he is building himself a palace, yet another one. And this is about more than just a physical building as well. He is wrecking part of the White House. It is an exercise in power and the fact that he cannot be stopped. He is also rewriting culture. And frankly, just as chilling to me, even though not as historically or culturally important, as when the Taliban in 2001 went in and blew up the Buddhist statues at the Bamiyan caves. It is cultural erasure. And it's deeply, deeply disturbing to me.
Well, the good news for you, John, is that if it's meant to be a public house, now the house is big enough to fit the entire public. Great news.
I'll turn up with my pickleball racket. Well, for more on all of this, I spoke to one of the people who right now is trying to halt Trump's demolition and rebuilding work. Sara Bronin is a professor of law at George Washington University. She's one of America's top property law experts and served as the chair of the independent federal agency charged with preserving the country's historic places, that is the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Professor Sara Bronin, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. Can you tell us, what were you thinking when you first saw those images this week of excavators clawing into the east wing of the White House?
It's absolutely horrifying for virtually every American to see our shared history being destroyed wantonly in this way.
On the question, though, as to whether he has the power to do this, I mean, the President of the United States can blow up the world with his arsenal of nuclear weapons, surely he can knock down the West Wing or the East Wing or anything he likes.
I would argue no, not just from a legal perspective, but from a moral one as well. As the chair of the Federal Historic Preservation Agency for 2 years in the Biden administration, I helped to oversee a regulatory process under the National Historic Preservation Act that really compels almost every actor in the federal government to undergo review processes before they would do something of this nature. That act actually exempts the White House, but there are other constraints on the president's authority. There are other bodies that actually have to review actions that are taken at the White House. And it's not clear to me that President Trump has consulted with any of these bodies, or whether even if he did, he would be taking their advice.
So, Professor, why is it that the White House itself is exempt under those laws that do protect other buildings?
I think Congress probably would never have expected for a president to do what President Trump is doing right now to the White House. So in addition to exempting the White House from the National Historic Preservation Act's review process, they also exempted the U.S. Capitol and the Capitol grounds. We know from our experience for several hundred years here in this country that oftentimes changes to the Capitol, changes to the White House, sometimes they're contentious, but they seem to have occurred over the years in a way that's harmonious with the historic fabric. And that is not the case here. This is the polar opposite of that. It's a heinous act.
I suppose Donald Trump does have form back to the 1980s in New York. He was knocking over buildings that had historic Art Deco friezes on them. So I suppose none of this should really come as a surprise to a conservationist.
So you would think that somebody with an interest in classical architecture, as evidenced by an executive order that he issued earlier in this term, that somebody who views himself as part of a pantheon of historical figures would have respect for arguably the building that most symbolizes what it means to be an American. We look at the White House as Americans, and we think about Dolly Madison and the British coming to burn the White House, and everything that has happened in that building, Abraham Lincoln, the history, the layers of history, the materials that until earlier this week were still there to communicate between the people who came before and the people today are present. By completely destroying that, President Trump is severing the links to our past. And again, it really seems at odds with his desire to be part of a grand historical tradition here in the United States.
So what potential is there for some kind of legal injunction to try and stop this?
That's actually one of the very things that I'm investigating over the course of this week, and will continue to until working with some others, we can figure out a way to try to stop this. There are people all over the country who care deeply about our historic places. I know that because I met so many of them while I held the role at the Federal Historic Preservation Agency, and none of them, no patriotic American would view this act as being something that we can let stand. So we are looking at every legal avenue. We are overturning every federal statute to see where we might get a leg to stand on in court. And believe me, we will take action within the preservation community to try to stop more demolition, which seems to be slated, according to the president's recent comments.
The White House has pushed back this week, saying, hey, there's nothing to see here. All presidents make changes to the White House. Obama did it, Biden did it, everybody does it. Why would you argue this is so different?
Oh, I don't think that's a tough question, John. I mean, this is not just the addition of some auxiliary feature like the bowling alley, which, by the way, is in the basement. Nobody can even really see it. A tennis court that was hidden by landscaping. This is the White House itself. This is the building that bore witness to so much of our history, an iconic building, not just in Washington, D.C., not just in the United States, but around the world. And that's why I think you're talking to me today, even though you're based in Australia, because everybody around the world views the White House as a symbol of democracy. When it's destroyed, what does that mean for our democracy? I think time will tell, but we need to figure out a way to prevent this from from going any further.
Does this also feel to you, Sara Bronin, as being about more than a building, that this is also on a symbolic level? This is metaphor as well as reality?
When I learned about the plans for the ballroom, I said, you know what, these are just plans. This is going to blow over, and who's going to back this idea of putting a ballroom on White House grounds? When I saw earlier this week the beginnings of demolition of the East Wing, I thought, well, maybe they're just tearing out a wall. But when I heard today that it was the entire East Wing of the White House that was slated for demolition as soon as Saturday, it really took my breath away. As a symbol, it's extremely important. It's important not just for the preservation community and for people who care about old buildings, but in many ways it is a metaphor for what's happening right now in that White House. I don't know how the White House stands for the coming months based on my knowledge, with no plans to put something else there, no approval process, no construction plans. There's no chance that they have what they need to go forward. So we're going to be sitting here as Americans looking at half of a White House for months and months, maybe years on end. How does that make us feel as a country? I can't imagine this continuing forward, but if it does, I think hopefully more Americans will recognize that we have a real problem in the White House.
Professor Sara Bronin, thanks for joining us on Planet America's Weekend Edition.
Thank you so much for covering this really, really important story.
These days, everyone in America seems to be accusing everyone else of being a Nazi or a fascist. It was one of the big themes of last year's election, you'll recall.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do.
I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi.
I don't know what the opposite of a Nazi is, but still in recent weeks, a bunch of Republican staffers were named, shamed and in some cases sacked for making comments in a group chat, including, "I love Hitler." Although Vice President J.D. Vance, who, let's not forget, famously once described Donald Trump as America's Hitler, tried this boys will be boys defence.
I really don't want us to grow up in a country where a kid telling a stupid joke, telling a very offensive stupid joke, is cause to ruin their lives. We're not canceling kids because they do something stupid in a group chat.
Nice try, Mr. Vice President, but for the record, these were hardly kids. Reports suggest that 8 of the 11 members in this group chat span the ages of 24 to 35. And J.D. Vance himself just turned 41.
Yeah, Vance went on to cite those text messages from Virginia's Jay Jones that we talked about on the show last week. You know, the ones where he was joking about his colleagues and their children being hypothetically murdered, those ones. And Vance suggested that the Jay Jones texts were far worse than anything said in a college group chat, and the guy who said it could become the Attorney General of Virginia. The thing is, though, Jay Jones was 32 when he wrote those text messages, younger than some of those young Republicans that Vance was defending as supposed kids. Not to mention, Vance has been hypocritical about this kind of thing before. When a 24-year-old Doge employee was caught posting things like, "You could not pay me to marry outside of my ethnicity," and "I just want a eugenic immigration policy. Is that too much to ask?" and "Normalise Indian hate." Vance defended him, writing, "I obviously disagree with some of the posts, but I think stupid social media activity shouldn't ruin a kid's life." Yet Vance showed no such mercy to any young adults who mocked Charlie Kirk's death in any way, shape or form a couple of months ago. You're not a free speech advocate if you're only defending your political allies, John. So, on that note, let me say that some of these young Republican texts are massive beat-ups. Like, take, for instance, the famous "I love Hitler" exchange. They were writing about some authority figure from Michigan who was coming and who had apparently said they would choose delegates that would vote for the most right-wing person. And the other person replied, "Great, I love Hitler." They were obviously making a joke about saying the most right-wing thing they could possibly imagine. They could have said, "Great, I love Genghis Khan," or whatever. The point of the joke was that they were pretending to be far to the right of where they actually were. So for Politico to pretend that they were genuinely professing to love Hitler and making that their headline, I thought that was extremely dubious. Having said that, putting some comments in the right context actually makes them much worse. Like, for instance, when one of the chat participants wrote about watching an NBA playoff game and another chatters replied, "I'd go to the zoo if I wanted to watch monkey play ball." Now that's not good. And I don't know the context at all of chatters using epithets like retard and more than 251 times in this chat. But in certain circumstances, those are extremely hateful words that are very hard to come back from, John. So I'd probably say, rather than condemning every person in the chat, which has tens of thousands of messages in it, you'd have to go through and hold people to account on a case-by-case basis, depending on what they said.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point you make about Politico. I'd say the reason why they put "I love Hitler" in their headline was that a lot of the other things were so racist, so disgusting, you couldn't actually put it in a headline without repeating the vilification. But this week, Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Office of the Special Counsel, Paul Ingrassia, was forced to withdraw his nomination after he sent a text saying that he had a Nazi streak, and that was published.
Ingrassia had a lot more issues than that, though, John. Referring to Vivek Ramaswamy in 2024, Ingrassia wrote, "Never trust a Chinaman or Indian. Never."
What is he, from 1890 or something?
Maybe. And on top of that, he's got plenty of baggage that doesn't come in the form of leaked text messages as well. Like, for instance, he previously did legal work for Andrew Tate and has been seen at a rally for anti-Semitic far-right activist Nick Fuentes. And then there's the credible sexual harassment complaint against him. Earlier this year, when Ingrassia went on a work trip with one of his juniors, she found when she reached the front desk of the hotel they were staying at, she had not been provided with a room of her own because Ingrassia had arranged ahead of time to have her hotel room cancelled so she would have to stay with him. The woman later retracted her complaint, allegedly out of fear of retribution. So there's that. And we add all of that to the fact that the role he was nominated for was a role safeguarding administration ethics. The Office of Special Counsel is supposed to protect federal employee whistleblowers from reprisal. So it makes sense to me that some moderate senators would have been a little bit concerned about this fellow.
We've been wondering where they'd draw the line. Apparently there it is. So far, not backing out or backing down is Graham Plattner, though. He's running in the Democratic primary for the Maine Senate seat, currently held by Republican Susan Collins. That is despite this.
Plattner's own campaign released a video from his brother's wedding a decade ago in which a shirtless Plattner is lip-syncing a song. On his chest, a tattoo of a skull and crossbones that he got with other Marine Squad leaders during a drunken night in Croatia in 2007. The design strongly resembles the one used by Adolf Hitler's SS troops during World War II.
Oh dear. Although Plattner claims that he didn't know that the skull symbol was linked to the Nazis.
At no point in this entire experience of my life did anybody ever once say, "Hey, you're a Nazi." It never came up until we got wind that in the opposition research, somebody was shopping the idea that I was a secret Nazi with a hidden Nazi tattoo. And I can honestly say that if I was trying to hide it, I've not been doing a very good job for the past 18 years.
And who amongst us hasn't gotten drunk in Croatia and had a Nazi tattoo put on our chest? But in fact, Plattner's best argument against being called a Nazi could be this.
Plattner also wrote that instead of getting more conservative as he aged, he, quote, got older and became a communist, and referred to himself as a vegetable-growing, psychedelics-taking socialist these days.
So I guess that is the opposite of a Nazi. And Plattner has also said some things he now says he regrets on Reddit too. Responding to a thread titled, "White people aren't as racist or as stupid as Trump thinks," he wrote, "Living in white rural America, I'm afraid to tell you they actually are." And that, perhaps more than the Nazi tattoo or even the self-professed communism, might be the thing that stops Plattner becoming the Democratic nominee for Senate in Maine. Voters don't tend to like to be called racist and stupid.
No, especially not in Maine, which is over 90% white, John. And Plattner said more than that as well, a few fairly negative comments about women and the police, none of which are going to go well in the primary. This is an interesting scenario, though, because the Oppo research that was released was obviously released on the same day the super establishment-backed Janet Mills, she's the Maine governor, she got in the race that day. And as Ro Khanna tweeted, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee leaked this to try to destroy Plattner the day their hand-picked candidate entered the race. I respect Plattner's journey and the man he is today. I reject the politics of personal destruction. Now, for his part, Plattner says that his Reddit comments came when he was venting online during a period of rootless PTSD after his military deployments.
It's important to know that this was a time in my life where I was struggling deeply. I got out of the Army in 2012. I had PTSD. I had depression. I had all of the things that come with serving in a war, in 2 wars, that I eventually began to not believe in at all. It left me feeling very unmoored. It left me feeling very disillusioned, very alienated, and very isolated. And I think, like a lot of people, I went on the internet to post stupid things and get in fights and find some form of community in some way, some outlet for my feelings, for my rage, for my isolation. It wasn't until I found actual community that all went away.
Look, that's all fine, except Plattner's political director knew all of this as well, and yet she resigned anyway. She said, while I am empathetic to Graham's experiences and respect his personal journey and growth, I cannot overlook the volume and nature of his past comments, many of which were made as an adult, not as a young man. So she's like the opposite of Vance there. It has also been noted that an acquaintance of Plattner's said that he knew that his tattoo was a Nazi tattoo. The acquaintance said that they had heard Plattner refer to it as his Totenkopf. That's the specific name for the SS military picture. That former political director from before also said Graham has an anti-Semitic tattoo in his chest. He's not an idiot. He's a military history buff. Maybe he didn't know it when he got it, but he got it years ago and should have had it covered up because he knows damn well what it means. For the record, he has now had it covered up. So he got there eventually, but I think this is one of those cases where everyone's going to have to make up their own mind.
Yeah, we'll see what the polls say about all this.
Yeah, but something that doesn't get mentioned much, not as much as Twitter in American politics, is that American education has been flagging badly for a number of years now. Schools famously struggled during the COVID period, but there have been serious concerns expressed since at least 2013. In fact, by some measures, American students have regressed to a level not seen in 25 years or more. From 2013 until today, reading performances declined amongst 4th graders in 46 out of 50 states, and they only meaningfully improved in 2 states, Mississippi and Louisiana. And this is where things become interesting. Mississippi is considered to be America's poorest and least fortunate state, yet when it comes to education, the last decade and a half in Mississippi have been nothing short of miraculous. Between 2013 and 2019, Mississippi's 4th grade reading scores jumped roughly 10 points, far outpacing the national trend. And Mississippi's ranking surged from 49th in 2013 to number 9 in the country in 2024. But it wasn't just the high achievers dragging Mississippi up. From 2007 through to 2024, the gap between the top 10th and the bottom 10th in each state grew. That is, in 49 out of the 50 states. In Mississippi, the achievement gap shrank between the top and bottom. And when you take into account just how poor Mississippi is, their educational performances are even more remarkable. Mississippi has one of the highest child poverty rates in America, a factor associated with low test scores. So after adjusting for student demographics such as income, race, etc., Mississippi becomes the #1 state in the nation for 4th grade reading if you judge it on a level playing field. And it doesn't end at 4th grade reading either. In 2024, Mississippi was best at educating kids in 4th grade math as well. Yes, 4th grade reading and also 8th grade math. If you're an underprivileged kid in America, you will, on average, get the best education in the country in Mississippi, where per pupil spending is half as high as states like Massachusetts. So how have they done it? Since 2010, Mississippi has implemented a large number of education reforms, including requiring that third graders pass a literacy exam before they are promoted to the fourth grade. They also began screening kids for reading deficiencies and training instructors in how to teach reading better, emphasising phonics. They also hired literacy coaches to work in the lowest performing schools. And there is so much more, heaps of reforms. So which of these reforms made the difference? And can the rest of America learn from them? To find out, I spoke to Dr. Angela Bass, Executive Director of Mississippi First, a policy non-profit for education research and reform. Dr. Angela Bass, which of the Mississippi reforms do you think had the greatest effect?
It definitely starts with our investment in early childhood education. In 2013, we passed the Early Learning Collaborative Act, which was the state's first investment in state-funded pre-K. And it wasn't just an investment into a pre-K program. We started one of the top early childhood programs in the nation, and it still is today. And it has expanded, and research tells us that kids who participate in our pre-K program outperform their peers who didn't participate in those pre-K programs. And we've just seen such a big investment in all types of early childhood programs all across the state. And now we're seeing the result of those seeds that we planted 11 years ago. Also, we saw just a big investment in ensuring that kids learned how to read. And that looked like ensuring that teachers were trained in the science of reading. That looked like putting accountability measures in place. So back in 2013, we passed the law that said that every third grade child had to read at a basic level before going on to the fourth grade. And I know that that seems like a really hard thing to tell a kid, that they can't go on to the fourth grade without reading at a basic level. But what it did was encourage adults to get their acts together to ensure that kids who were in the third grade could actually read. So what that looked like was just more intentionality behind what kids were learning, making sure that there were high quality instructional materials, making sure that teachers were trained, and that we were tracking kids' performance year after year to ensure that they were actually growing, and we were putting interventions in place to ensure that they would be successful by third grade. And now we've just seen it take off, and those kids are set up for success.
So you got holding kids to strict standards, even at a young age, but what about those pre-K programs that you mentioned? Lots of states have pre-K programs. Why is your program so much more effective?
Yeah, and I wouldn't attribute it only to pre-K. I think that what has happened in Mississippi is just an alignment of systems across. It's not just that we have a policy or a program. It's just that everybody bought in. You saw the advocacy community, the philanthropic community, the policymakers and school districts all get on one accord about what was important. And they aligned all of their efforts to ensuring that the little resources that we have in Mississippi are all being maximized towards a common goal.
Now, usually when education results are poor, the answer is to invest more resources. And Mississippi certainly did that, but not as much as the rest of the country did. Yet only Mississippi saw results from those extra resources. Is there some secret to the way you guys use those extra resources that made them more effective?
I think that's exactly right. I think that it's not just about pouring in additional resources. It's about the implementation of the programs. It's about ensuring that everybody's on board with the plans, that there's comprehensive plan, there's collective impact that needs to be made to ensure that the resources are being maximized. And I would say, Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the nation. And we didn't have as many resources as some other states had to invest in their education system. But what we did have, were people who were really passionate about making reforms in our state. And we had folks who were mobilized around the need to ensure that our kids were successful.
The thing I find kind of fascinating about this is that it's not just raw results, it's also about equality. From 2007 to 2024, there's literally been only one state in America where the gap in reading ability between the top 10th and bottom 10th of fourth graders has shrunk. That state is Mississippi. So why do you think your reforms helped poorer students in particular?
Another reform that passed around this 2013 time was a revamp of our accountability system. And our accountability system, it scores schools from A to F. And it's calculated by measuring how many kids are proficient in reading, but not just proficiency, it measures growth. And it doesn't just measure growth, it measures the growth of the bottom 25% of students in each school. And so you had, before 2013, you had schools that were rated high and they were only serving the top students, the top performers. But when we put in place a new accountability system that focused on growth and the growth of the bottom 25%, you saw those school districts not looking so good because they weren't growing their lowest kids. So we basically turned accountability on its head, and we ensured that school districts were not only just measuring themselves by how many kids they got proficient on the exam, but that they were measuring themselves by how well they were growing the bottom 25% of students.
And have other states started copying Mississippi yet?
You betcha. So I used to go to conferences and, this was 10 or so years ago. And I would just sit in the back and, with my head down because I was just, so embarrassed of what they would say about Mississippi. And today I go to conferences and people are asking me about what's happening in Mississippi. And Mississippi leaders are presenting to other states and sharing their practices. And we are just so excited about being a model state now.
And leaving aside your particular reforms, at least until they started copying you, the other states have seen some really poor outcomes for the last 20 years. Why do you think educational outcomes have been so ropey in the rest of America since 2007?
I'm not sure. When we talk to other states, when I talk to some of my colleagues from other states, they do name some of the challenges that Mississippi had in the beginning. I think that Mississippi really benefited from being at the bottom. There was no arguing with any constituent in Mississippi that change needed to happen. And so it's really easy to get buy-in from all different types of stakeholders. And I think that, other states it's harder to align on what the priorities should be. And so I'm guessing that, that has something to do with it because it really does take aligned efforts across government, across school districts, educators, and the advocacy community.
Dr. Angela Bass, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Thank you.
And that is it for another weekend edition of Planet America. You can catch 2 all-new shows each and every week, Monday nights 9:35 p.m. on ABC TV and at 8 p.m. Eastern on ABC News every Friday night.
Both programs available on ABC iView and online. And do not forget the Planet Extra podcast, PEP, and all the very finest pod places. See you there.
Bye-bye.